Investigators are recovering pieces of a Lion Air flight that crashed into the sea off Indonesia this morning, including the plane's tail end.
All 189 passengers are feared dead. Kris Van Cleave is following this story out of our Washington bureau, and he joins us now. He's our transportation correspondent. So, Kris, we saw that video in Ben Tracy's piece where it shows the plane taking off from the airport and the pilot making a request to return to the airport just before it crashed. What do we know about what went wrong after takeoff?
Well, we know that there was clearly an issue, and that was part of why they returned. Flight Radar 24, which is a website that tracks airplanes as they're in flight and records a decent amount of data, went through and sort of did a deep dive on what's been available so far. And what they observed was the aircraft plummeting about 500 feet a couple of minutes after takeoff. It then makes that sort of unusual turn back, and then it levels off, climbs a bit, levels off, and then it plummets. The data shows a surge in speed and a steep decline, almost like a nosedive. And that's certainly very concerning. There are some red flags that are starting to emerge. There's a report that a similar issue with this aircraft occurred the day before. The airline says it was fixed, but certainly investigators are going to want to look at what was done when that first issue showed up, if in fact they were related, and if it was properly fixed, or if this airplane went into service when it shouldn't have. A couple of other things here. The search is on for the black boxes. They look like this. They're not actually black at all. They're usually in the tail section, and there are some reports that some part of the tail has been located. The black boxes are going to be very important, the voice and data recorders, because you're unlikely to have any survivors here. So that's going to give you a better sense. They record thousands of pieces of data, so that should give investigators some sense as to what may have gone wrong here. But this was a brand new airplane. It had only been in service since August. This was a 737 MAX 8. This is the newest version of the 737. It was a sort of a complete remodel, if you will, a complete update of the airplane, new avionics, new engines. It's the first MAX to crash. So you also need to look at, is there potential for any systemic issue with the 737 MAX aircraft? That could ripple through the entire aviation world. The 737 is the best-selling airplane in history. It's operated, the MAX is, by 3 U.S. carriers. So there's a lot to look at here and a lot we don't know. But certainly this was a tragic accident, another tragic accident for Indonesian aviation. It is a country that does not have a particularly strong safety record or safety culture around its rapidly growing aviation sector.
Kris, it's funny you would bring that up, because one of the first things I said to Vlad this morning is, boy, if I was planning a trip to Indonesia or Bali or something like that, I would reconsider how I'm getting in and out of the country. Can we talk a little bit about aviation in Indonesia? I think most people would remember 2014, the plane crash. Yeah, so, but, you know, what's the track record like for the Indonesian airline industry?
Not good. You had several Indonesian airlines that were actually banned from flying into Europe. Most recently, Indonesian Air just recently received authorization to fly into Europe because of safety issues. You had the AirAsia crash in 2014, which was pilot error. Lion Air, which launched in 2000, I've counted up at least 15 incidents that airline has had. Now, if you were to look at, say, a U.S. carrier to have 15 safety issues over the course of the last 18 years, you would be looking very closely at that airline, and it is highly likely that that airline wouldn't be operating in the U.S. any longer. So there is a different level of tolerance for aviation issues, it appears, in Indonesia. It is also a rapidly growing aviation market. Indonesia is a country that's of islands. It's spread out, so flying from point A to point B makes a lot of sense. You have seen a rapid growth across Southeast Asia in aviation as there's been a growing middle class. More people can afford to fly, and you have these airlines that have sort of popped up overnight. Lion Air has been aggressively expanding. They're a budget carrier, and you don't necessarily have the safety culture and the regulatory oversight that you have in other countries, and that has led to several accidents.
Hey, Kris, just out of curiosity, right? You mentioned this might have nothing to do with Lion Air or how they run their business, but it occurred to me that, we get online, we book a flight. Sometimes we really don't know what the airlines are. They're associated with maybe a main, like American Airlines or another airline, but there's some sort of local startup or a budget airline from that company. How easy it is for me, a regular traveler, to research the track record of some of these airlines? Can I just go online and find out how many errors or near misses have occurred?
I mean, you can certainly, with a relatively easy Google search, get a sense of how many accidents or incidents they've been involved in. But it requires the consumer to go and do some extra work. I mean, I think U.S. flyers take for granted how safe the U.S. aviation industry has become. There's not been a crash of a mainline U.S. airliner since 2001. You haven't had a crash of a passenger plane since the commuter aircraft in Buffalo in 2009. It's an unparalleled period of safety in U.S. aviation that doesn't necessarily translate globally. And I think that you make a good point that U.S. consumers would have to sort of go the extra step to look at who you're flying. Typically U.S. carriers, their international alliances, they do take a look at, what's the safety track record of this airline. But certainly I can look at any of the major alliances that American, Delta, United are in, and there are airlines in there that I wouldn't be comfortable flying.
It'll be interesting to see what the black box returns. Kris Van Cleave, as always, we thank you.
Sure thing.